Rabbi Bemporad holds two major professional positions, the first of which is director of the Nonprofit Center for Interreligious Understanding in New Jersey, which he founded in 1992. He is also director of the John Paul II Center and professor of interreligious studies, both at the Vatican's St. Thomas Aquinas University, the Angelicum, in Rome, where he has been teaching for the past 20 years. After leaving Havarah Beth Shalom Synagogue in Alpine, New Jersey, after 27 years as senior rabbinic scholar, he recently started Congregation Micah in Crestkill, New Jersey. A major Jewish presence in Catholic-Jewish relations, Rabbi Bemporad is one of the rare Jewish leaders to have had a personal audience with Pope John the 23rd, numerous personal audiences with Pope John Paul II, and was one of 3 rabbis to have blessed him shortly before his death. Most recently, he met with Pope Francis at the conclusion of the Refugees and Migrants Conference, which was co-sponsored by his Center for Interreligious Understanding in November of 2017. In 2016, Rabbi Bemporad became the first person ever to receive an honorary PhD in theology from the Angelicum since that university's inception in 1577. Over the years, he has worked with Jewish, Muslim, Christian, Hindu, Buddhist groups, receiving honors and awards from each. In addition, he's authored and edited numerous books, scholarly works, and articles. Among them, he is co-author of a book entitled Our Age, the Historic Era of Christian Jewish Understanding. And most recently, he was commissioned to write a book on St. Pope John Paul II's outreach to Jews and Judaism by the John Paul II Foundation in Belgium. A very interesting fact, and I have to admit this one is from Richard Bernholz, I did not get this, is that Rabbi Jack Bemporad was the rabbi at Richard's congregation in Dallas in the late 1970s. Richard and Jack's fathers became best friends, and they used to walk together every day. Rabbi Jack is not only a remarkable theologian, Richard said he wanted you to know, and I agree, but he's also a wonderful pastor and counselor and human person all rolled into one. You would not expect someone with such abilities and honors to be humble, but his humility shines through. Would you please join me this evening in welcoming to the podium Rabbi Dr. Jack Bemporad.
Matthew, that was much too kind. And you know, I can tell you why it's too kind. Can I tell you? There's a very good reason. Because you will know at the end of this lecture if any of that is true. You see, you know, it's because if it turns out that what I say makes sense, then you'll say, well, that's not so bad. He probably was right. But if you say, what in the world is he talking about? I mean, what world is he living in? Then you'll see that maybe everything that was said. Matthew, thank you so much. And Joel, now the senior rabbi here, I'm delighted to have seen you again. The last time I spoke here, he was the assistant rabbi, you know, and I knew he had a great future, and I'm delighted that he's here to, in fact, be established in this future. But I must say that my heart goes out to Richard Bernholz. When I became the rabbi in 1972, that shows you how young I am. In 1972, I became the senior rabbi at Temple Emmanuel in Dallas. He was there, his parents were there, and then I followed his really illustrious career. He's one of the truly great rabbis of our time, and I think all of you who know him and have been his congregants are truly blessed that he was there with you. I want to add a special thanks to the president of St. Leo and his wife for being here, but most of all, I cannot tell you the joy that I feel that Linda Taggart is here, who was a student at the Angelicum. And as I said tonight at the dinner, the amazing thing is that at the dinner, when she made the application, I must say in those days, it was not generally accepted that we were going to give a scholarship, which was, a good scholarship, if you remember, to someone who wasn't a priest or a nun. And a woman? Wait a minute, we're not going to give scholarships to women. What are they going to be doing? Keep in mind, this goes back a long time ago, but her application was so fantastic. Her skills in speaking and in writing were so magnificent that every single one of them said she's the best student, and if she won't be accepted, none of the others should be accepted. So Linda, let me thank you so much for being here. She's just outstanding. Now, I picked as a topic to talk to you, and now that I see the audience, maybe it's not the right topic. That doesn't mean that I'm going to change the topic, but the topic that I picked was God, science, and religion. But it's something that I've been thinking a lot about, and I've been sort of studying it and writing about it. So I thought that I would like to share some of the ideas that I have on this topic. But for me, the easiest thing is not to begin with God or with science, but to begin with religion, for the very simple reason that I think the best way to talk about God is if you first start with religion, then let's talk about science, and then let's see how the two of them somehow give us some sense of what we mean by God. Now, I had the good fortune years ago when I was a student at the Hebrew Union College that Erich Fromm came to visit, and he needed someone to drive him around Cincinnati. And I said, look, I volunteered. It turns out, he said, no, why don't we just go for a walk? And I had the good fortune of spending about 4 or 5 hours with Erich Fromm. He was a great psychoanalyst, a great teacher, and I never had an experience of anyone who was able to listen the way he listened. It's almost like whatever you said to him, he could see exactly where you were. He was able to penetrate into your inner sense. He had a sense of the inner. And so as a result, I started reading a good deal of his works, and one of them, in Psychoanalysis and Religion, he came out with a definition of religion that I'd like to begin my lecture with that definition. He said that religion provides a frame of orientation and an object of devotion. And he says everybody, in that sense, is religious. Because everybody in one form or another has to find some way of fitting into the world. Where do I stand in relationship to the world, in relationship to the past, to the present, to that which is beneath me, to that which may be above me? In other words, I need to connect all kinds of different areas. Just keep in mind, I've got to deal with facts, I've got to deal with values, I've got to deal with the ethical, I've got to deal with the beautiful, I've got to deal with the holy, and how do I put all these things together? And then he said, that's not enough. What actually puts these things together is that you have an object of devotion. Now, the problem, of course, that many people have objects of devotion that are anything but good. They may have objects of devotion that are very self-destructive or destructive of others. So he therefore said religion isn't necessarily a good thing. And so he made a distinction between authoritarian religions and humanistic religions. Well, in thinking about what Fromm said, I sort of revised it a little bit. And in a book that I edited called The Inner Journey, I actually said you can divide this statement into 4 questions. And let me indicate what I mean, okay? I think that religion basically is a way of satisfying certain needs, certain basic needs. And here are they. First, as Fromm said, you need intelligibility. You have to have some way of putting the world together. Now, that intelligibility could either be done positively or it could be done negatively. Let me indicate what I mean. I think that Judaism, and in this sense Christianity also, is a religion that seeks understanding, not certainty. There's a difference between a search for certainty, where I've got to have the truth, the absolute, the real truth, and a religion that says, no, I'm open to experience, I'm open to logic, I'm open to reason, and I have to find a way in which I can come to the truth without in some way not be able to find some way of revising that truth so that I can come up with other attitudes and other positions, you see? So the first thing is you need to have some sense of understanding the world. Secondly, I think that every human being needs reassurance. What does that mean, you need reassurance? Let me ask you a question. Did any of you go to a doctor because you were sick and you were concerned about your sickness without asking, or at least, if not openly, at least to yourself, you asked the question, is this serious? Is this really something serious? You want reassurance, don't you? Am I distorting anything? Isn't that your experience? You want reassurance. So, in a way, religion is the search for reassurance. But of course, you may be reassured by believing in a lot of things that aren't true. Or you can be reassured because you are basing your reassurance on something that is of value. Here, by the way, let me just switch to science. I'll get back to it. That's one of the reasons we need science. And the reason religion needs science is because we need scientific investigation to give us some sense of what really makes sense in a whole range of areas that religion really has very little to do with. You know, it's not a matter, if you really want to get healthy, you need to go to a doctor. If you want to know that you want to fix your sink, you need to go to someone. Of course, today it's very hard to find anyone that can fix anything. You know, they tell the story about this guy invited this plumber, and he charged a fortune. And the guy said, listen, he says, my God, he says, I'm a doctor, I don't charge that much. So the plumber says, that's true. When I was a doctor, I wasn't charging that much either. So the real question, of course, is that, you want this reassurance. The third thing you need is recognition. And what does that mean, recognition? You have to feel that somehow you're worthwhile. I sometimes say that what people really want is not necessarily to be praised. Yes, they want to be praised. But in reality, they want to be known. They want to be known. They want to know that there's someone that understands them, that understands what it is that's driving them, what it is that really, I was complimented by my oldest son when I was 85. They gave a little party for me. And he says, Dad, I didn't know what it means to be a father until I had children. All the time I thought you were too worried, you were too controlling. Now that I have children, I understand you. The reality is we want to be known. We want to be known. And there is this need to be known. So we have to have intelligibility. We have to have reassurance. We have to have recognition. And finally, we also have to feel that we're part of something greater. Something that we'll feel that we can devote ourselves to, and what we devote ourselves to is something worthwhile. Now, whether we like it or not, whether we're religious or not, the reality is that every human being needs to satisfy these basic needs. Now, I think personally that it's an authentic religion that satisfies this best of all. Now, what makes a religion authentic? And here I would say there are two elements that are foundational in Judaism, and I think to a degree are foundational in Christianity, and that is that the religion has to be rational. You cannot have a religion that is irrational. You cannot have a religion that's based in superstition. You can't have a relationship that's based in magic. One of the clear statements that you find, especially in the book of Deuteronomy, the 18th chapter, is the condemnation of superstition and all kinds of things that go against reason. I don't know any other religion, and here perhaps I can be corrected, that goes as far as Judaism in that sense. Should I give you the reason? Would you be interested in knowing why? If you look at the Talmud in Shabbat, it says that on Judgment Day, when you die and you face God and you have to confront God, guess what are the questions that God asks you? Take a guess. The first question is, which is, I think, a legitimate question, did you give up hope? In other words, look, I know life is hard. I know you've got struggles. But if you trusted me on some level, you wouldn't have given up hope. Did you give up hope? I love that. Did you conduct your affairs with honesty and integrity? I even love that more. Because I think that really what counts is whether you live your life with integrity, whether you live a life that you can say, somehow I can go to bed at night and feel that, even though I'm not perfect, even though I make mistakes, I've done my best. Now, here's the kicker. You know what the third question is? Did you think logically? Did you derive proper inferences from your premises? Hello? Can you believe that God, do you really think God would go to you and ask you, are you thinking logically? I don't know. I mean, that's not the kind of thing that God would ask. It is really. But the reality is that Judaism is basically rational, and it believes that logic is foundational to religion, that you can't have a proper religion unless you have reason. Why? Because otherwise you'll believe a lot of nonsense, and therefore you have to be able to question. And if you don't question, and if you don't have the proper way of questioning, if you don't have logic, then you're not going to get anywhere. Now here, it seems to me, science is very, very important. But secondly, Judaism takes ethics as central. That in fact, if a person and a people do not live ethically and act ethically, they're being irreligious. I think that in that sense, prophetic Judaism, biblical Judaism is uniquely a religion that teaches the significance of individual and social ethics. Here's what Judaism says. Try to fulfill your obligations. Try to fulfill your promises, and you will have a much clearer idea of who you are and what you can do. Take upon yourself responsibility. If you take upon yourself responsibility, then you can see. You can talk a lot about but try it. Really immerse yourself in it. Now let me push that a little bit. Akiba was asked this question, and Rabbi Akiba was one of the great, great teachers of Judaism. He was asked, what is more important, the work of God or the work of man? That seems like a strange question. What is more, God creates the world, what is more important? Now, being a good Jew, he answers a question with a question. They say, why do you Jews always answer a question with a question? And the answer is, why shouldn't we? It's this, but in any case, so having asked this question, is it better the works of God or the works of man? Guess what Akiba says? He asks, what do you say a blessing, over the wheat or over the bread? You don't say a blessing over the wheat. You say a blessing over the bread. Do you say a blessing over the grapes, or do you say a blessing over the wine? So if we're saying a blessing over the bread and over the wine and not the wheat, it's certainly the case that it's the work of man that has to be taken most seriously. And throughout the prophets, you have all kinds of saying that to really know God. Here, let me just quote what Leo Bax says, one of the great, great teachers of Judaism. Leo Bax says this: to know God and to do right have become synonymous in the prophets. Jeremiah says, he judged the cause of the poor and needy, then it was well with him. Is not this to know me, saith the Lord? Also, for example, when Jeremiah says, thus says the Lord, let not him that glories glory in this, but that he understands and know me, that I am the Lord who exercise loving kindness, justice, and righteousness on the earth. Now, to translate the concern for the ethical so that every human being can experience it, you will be surprised at what I'm going to say next. You know what the greatest revolution in history is? The Sabbath. Why? You would say, what does the Sabbath have to do? I'll tell you why. With the Sabbath, every human being, every single human being, a man, a woman, a slave, even an animal, a stranger, was in control of his or her time. One day a week, they were no longer slaves. One day a week, they could make decisions about their life. It wasn't somebody else that was telling them how they should live their life. All of a sudden, they had a different sense of what it meant to be a human being. That's an incredibly important thing. And so therefore, I think that Judaism tries to impress upon us the importance of reason and ethics. Now, in that sense, it seems to me that science is essential. So let me now move a little bit from religion to science. Now, I have to acknowledge to you that I spent a lot of time teaching philosophy of science when I was teaching at the university. And so I have a very, very profound respect for science. And you need science. Shall I tell you why you need science? You need science because you have religions teaching things that they shouldn't be really forcing people to do. I cannot tell you how often I've had to confront individuals who were, Jehovah's Witnesses, who actually refused to give their children transfusions. Fortunately, laws changed. But, but that's a religious belief, isn't it true? It's like the Christian scientists. You know about these, one guy, Christian scientist, meets another man, and he says, how are you? I'm fine. He says, how are you? Well, so-so. What do you mean so-so? He said, well, my father's not feeling good. What do you mean your father's not feeling good? I'm a Christian Science. Tell your father that he thinks he's not feeling good, that he should think that he should feel well and he'll be fine. Never thought about it. Try it, you'll see. If he thinks he's going to be fine, he's going to be fine. A few months later they meet and he says, how are you? Fine. He says, by the way, how's your father? Well, he thinks he's dead. So the reality here, of course, is you don't want that. Look at where we're going in the Orthodox world with vaccinations. Vaccinations. I can't imagine why you have ultra-Orthodox Jews who will not vaccinate their children. That's madness. That's why you need science. Isn't that right? Take, for example, the issue of climate change. It is a disaster what's happening in the world today in terms of the destruction of the environment. So science seeks to develop general laws and regulations, stable patterns of predictability, and you need this eventually as an arena and as a foundation for our actions. You see, you need science not simply as a theory. You need science also as a practice. And so in order for us to do ethics, in order for us to achieve anything, we need to have a proper understanding of the order of things. If we don't understand the order of things, we can't function in that. The scientist does not ask, does the world have order and intelligibility? They assume that the world has order and intelligibility. What the scientist asks is, how does this particular problem, how does this particular disorder, how does this fit in the overall order so that we can change it so that it becomes intelligible? And so here it seems to me that always science makes certain presuppositions. Namely, they presuppose the laws and regulations as stable patterns of predictability, and these patterns are essential for human purposes. An arena of order which serves as a foundation for the very possibility of ethical action, plus these realizations become elements in future developments. And you see, all science, now I'm quoting something I wrote years ago, all sciences presuppose being and order. It takes them for granted and does not discuss the more radical question of the ground for the being and order of what is. We're stuck with this question. Why is there something rather than nothing? And what is the ground of the being that is? Why is there order and not chaos? And what is the ground of the order that is? These questions go beyond the scope and range of science. As White has stated, the order of the world is no accident. There's nothing actual which could be actual without some measure of order. It is not the case, Whitehead says, that there's an actual world which accidentally happens to exhibit an order of nature. no actual world because there is an order of nature. If there were no order, there would be no actual world. And so the very presuppositions of science are presuppositions that presuppose an orderly universe. An orderly universe. And it is when human beings emerge that a new level of awesome and magnificent possibilities of a self-conscious being who can begin to understand. And here my dear friend and Professor Hans Jonas put it best of all. Here's what he said. If human beings, or if man had been a blind result of an uncaring and meaningless process, then, here's what he says, the seeing is the product of the blind, the caring, the product of the uncaring. Does not this paradox cast doubt on the very concept of an indifferent nature, that abstraction of physical science? As the product of indifference, human beings too must be indifferent. Then the facing of his mortality, which simply warrant the reaction, let us eat and drink, for tomorrow we die. There's no point in caring for what has no sanction behind it in any creative intent. But if facing our finitude, we find that we do care, not only whether we exist, but how we exist, then there must be something, a being with a supreme care. This being, the very fact that we care, must qualify the totality which harbors that fact. So I think when we really take a look at science, we see that science in large measure, in fact, bolsters religion. It's a way in which religion somehow can find a way of justifying its belief that God is a creator of the world, that God is an ordering being, that there is something rather than nothing, that there's value in the world that's been created. And so I think that we have to then now talk a little bit about God, okay? Here, I must say, it's very interesting that if you look at the Bible, had it ever occurred to you that the Bible brings forth a new concept of God, and this new concept of God is a concept that was in opposition to paganism, to idolatry, and the multiplicity of God. The first thing is very interesting. When Abraham goes and is told about the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah in Genesis 18, he says, if there are 50 righteous people, would you destroy it? No. If there are 45, if there are 40, if there are 30, if there are 20, if there are 10. And then Abraham says something which is fantastic. He says, I who am but dust and ashes. From the point of view of being, I am nothing. But from the point of view of ethics, I have every reason to ask, shall not the judge of all the earth do justice? If you're really the God that needs to be believed in, you have to be a God of justice. Who believed in a God of justice in those days? Nobody. The gods were whimsical gods, irrational gods, gods of jealousy. This is what the gods were in those days, right? And then what about Moses? When the children of Israel want to get a leader after they spy out the lamp and the land, and they come back, and they want to build a leader to bring them back to Egypt, and they start stoning Moses and Joshua and Caleb. Numbers 14, if you want to look it up. It's interesting. God says to Moses, I've had it with this people. I've had it. I've had it. I don't want to have anything to do with them, okay? You know what Moses says? I'm going to make a great nation out of you, he says to Moses. And what do you think Moses says? He says, you can't do that. Why? Because you made certain promises. You promised that you would take them out of Egypt and bring them to the promised land. So Moses asked God this question, are you the kind of God that keeps his promises? And then he goes even further. He says, you yourself have told us that real power is in forgiving, not in destroying. Didn't you yourself say that you're an El, Rachum, V'chanun, Erech Avpayim, V'rav Chesed Ve'emet, that you are compassionate and gracious, patient, full of steadfast love and truth and forgiving? That's real power. Real power is to forgive, not to destroy. Wow, well, who do you think he was criticizing? He wasn't criticizing God. He was criticizing the pagan gods. I mean, it's just amazing. And what do you do with Job? The kind of questioning that Job raises in the book of Job. It's one of the most profound books in all religious literature. He says, if I had done any of these things, I would have deserved to suffer, but I didn't do any of that. Now, you either ask me, and I'll answer, or I'll ask you and you answer. Well, that's quite something, isn't it? Of course, God's answer is an interesting answer. You know what God's answer is. Did I tell you? Should I tell you? You see, the problem is that the friends who are saying everything is just, everything is just, everything is just, don't put themselves in Job's place. Because Job is suffering, right? So what God says to Job is, when was the last time you created a world? Tell me. When was the last time you created a world? Huh? You know, right? Have you ever put yourself in my place? Do you really know what I have to do to create the world? Did you have any idea? What I'm saying is that the Bible gradually builds up an idea of one God, and that idea of one God is an idea that is monotheistic. Now, what does monotheism teach? What monotheism teaches is not that there's not many gods. Monotheism teaches that there's not many people. Because what monotheism has contributed to the world is the idea of humanity, that every human being is made in the divine image, and that every human being counts. So it's no longer that I have a tribal God with one tribe lording over another tribe. What you have finally is the concept of one God. Now, there are a lot of implications of the concept of one God. If you have one God, a spiritual creator God who creates human beings in the divine image, then it means that God created man, human beings, and these human beings are co-creators with God. They are co-spiritual beings. If you look at the first chapter of Genesis, the one thing that's clear about the first chapter of Genesis, that God is a creator. You don't know anything else about God. And then, what does it mean that human beings are made, B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God? It means that human beings are co-creators with God. That's why Akiba could say what you're doing is excruciatingly important. And so if you have one God, you have one world. If you have one world, then you have one humanity. If you have one humanity, then you have one goal of peace and realization. Let me ask you this question. Why is it that the concept of the Messiah and the concept of the Messianic, which is the idea that there would be a time when, as Isaiah says beautifully, they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation. Will they learn or go accustomed to war anymore? And as Micah asks, but each man, each individual, shall sit under his vine and under his fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. One God also believes that ultimately the goal is peace. Why peace? Because if the gods are fighting, if the gods are plural, where there's no unity, then there can't be any peace. The very fact that you can't have an idea of a peaceful world without monotheism is amazing. Amazing. Think of it. Plato, look, I'm a lover of Plato. I started reading Plato when I was a teenager. My uncle did me a great favor. He sat down with me and read the Apology with me when I was 13. And I never got over it. Now maybe if I read it, I'll understand it. It took me, 73 years to get there. But anyhow, look, Plato himself in the ideal state, what does he say? You have three classes: governors, warriors, and workers. It never occurred to him that you could have a society without warriors. What I'm saying to you is the ideal of a vision of peace, the ideal of the vision of humanity, the ideal that we should strive to bring about a society which really brings in peace and really brings in compassion and caring and justice and righteousness and things like that nature. And I think this is really the issue. The issue is, do we believe in the kind of a God, or do we want a hero, or do we want a cult leader, or do we want someone that we can say, you take over for us? We don't want to accept responsibility at all. That becomes, it seems to me, the fundamental issue here. Now, we construct our experiences. We construct our experience. Don't think that experience comes to you. Everything we do is a construction of experiences. And we can construct our experience in terms of the virtues, in terms of compassion, caring, kindness, right? Love, affection. Or we can construct our experience in terms of the vices, hatred, resentment, complaining, and so on. That's up to you, you see. I think in large measure, we decide how we construct the experience in our life, and it will determine the kind of being we will have and the kind of being that we are. And so I think that our belief in God is the following, since God is the last thing I wanted to talk about. God, I think, is the source of power working through us if we but let him for good. Faith in God provides us with a source of confidence so that even defeats will not defeat it. When we face the bitter experience of evil, the sense of the senselessness of events, a world not of value but of disvalue, what is needed is the mobilizing again of the resources of confidence and of value which seems to have been eclipsed. Our faith in God and creation enables us to face the experience of suffering such that that particular suffering does not embitter all our experience. Our faith teaches us that the best way to face our own suffering is to engage in some unselfish action, revealing the confidence that the world could be made better through our own action for good. Thus, the belief in creation is that in spite of all the sin and evil, there is still a sense of the pervading value of the world, the ultimate worthwhilefulness of life. Religion must affirm its ethical essence, but here again, that essence must be based on the ethics of the prophets, with the realization that ethics does not stand by itself. In the words of Bosanquet, a philosopher that I loved when I was a teenager, religion annuls in morality nothing but its failures. The ideal goal of ethics, the demands for justice, requires a transcendent source, a transcendent guarantee. Only religion can provide us with an ultimate ground for hope. In conclusion, let me repeat a conversation I had with one of the great giants of the 20th century, Hans Jonas, who was one of the greats. I remember asking him, Professor Jonas, I was relatively young when I asked him, I said, and I'll conclude with this. In the Bible it says in the 6th chapter of Genesis, it repenteth of God that he created man, and it grieved him to his heart. What does that mean? It repenteth of God that he created man, and it grieved him to his heart. Here's what he said. Live your life in such a way that God does not repent that he created you. Thank you.